I've just recalled to the February of 2020 when I decided to jump on the Attack on Titan hype train, after sleeping on it for so long. So I decided to dedicate my heart and rewatch everything in preparation for the second half of Season 3, which had just completed its dub at the time. And before you ask, yes, that is correct, I'm that I then binge read the continuation, but at the time it only had 127 issues. I don't like waiting on weekly or even monthly releases worst of all, as I feel it ruins the immersion. And so I trailed off again and instead enjoyed the unfolding series of unfortunate events that was 2020. And because it was a well-written, realistic, and apocalyptic drama, I found it hard to criticize. But while I was waiting on the heavily anticipated conclusion to the titan of a story, see what I did there? My mischievous friends cannot help posting porn in general, in addition to the occasional spoilers, utterly ruining the Christian server. What wretched creatures. Like there was this one time I glimpsed a post where the good girl Mikasa was caught in 4K, sexually assaulting Eren's severed head with premarital lip-syncing. But heck, at least the girl was getting more action than I've ever had in my last 20 years of existence, so I can't really talk smack. But anyways, that and the announcement of how many chapters were left had longtime fans and sweatlords worried that the good champion Isayama might botch the ending. And sure enough, fast forward to present day, and the man really did betray us like he said he would. And not at all in the way in which we expected, but in the words of a good friend, that just makes it even better, to be honest. I mean, it was rather evident that people never took liking to the ending. And this ranged from the assumption that the big champion lost his godly powers of storytelling. But unironically, there were those who kept the tradition and reverted back to simple and clear-cut death threats in his spam folder. Now, if that isn't some cultured shit, I don't know what is. It does not matter how consistently good you prove to be as a writer. All it takes is one big mess and suddenly you're the scum of the earth. I suppose it is true that the greater one is, the harder they fall. I mean, it's understandable that people have grand expectations for not only long-running but severely successful epics like Attack on Titan. And when they got to the end, only for her to betray in the most unfavorable ways, everyone forgot or disregarded the fact that Isayama was consistently streaking with top-tier storytelling for an entire decade, with the majority at his side, enchanted by the epic tale, and riding its train to glorious conclusion. Like, that is a magician. I remember watching Season 1 and enjoyed it, but I never much favored the quintessential shonen theme of you have to become a monster to defeat a monster, and it didn't make much of an impression, despite the A+ execution. I never thought much of the show then, but that alone changed after Season 2, when Isayama introduced heavily dramatic characters like Ymir, who I believe was so well voiced during critical moments of her character arc that I genuinely came to believe she could have been a human being that existed in real life. And I'm not just saying this because she's my favorite lesbian of all time. Season 2 was when I started to notice that this breed of homie was different, and it really was going to be on some other shit. And then the mother kept one-upping itself every season, and really did transform into something different entirely. But at the same time, stayed consistent with the rules that had been set. And that was magic. That is any writer's dream of a successful story. And simply because of that, I cannot personally begrudge the man for how he chose to end it, even though I was disappointed, like many others. And honestly, I think the man fumbled the ball on purpose. This was literally his plan all along. While catching up on the finale, I sort of laughed my way through the last 2 chapters. Seeing how bad things got, I'm not sure if it was some sort of coping mechanica, but I will say the ending was unintentionally top-tier comedy. The best there is. Like, you know how the good man Eren wiped out literally 80% of human civilization, and all that happened to him was a swipe on the neck and a big wet premarital kiss from his biggest fan? Armin then went on to back him for taking one for the team, and how he will not let this era go to waste. I also liked how Eren revealed right before his eyes that it was he who orchestrated the Colossal Titan's entry within the walls, in addition to causing the devouring of his own mother. And I kid you not, Armin responded with the exact words of, Yeah, nah, yeah, nah, yeah, nah, yeah, nah, yeah, 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 don't worry about it, mate. Let's play 8 ball. And just when I thought it impossible for things to be any more wild as the up-to-no-good mischievous lad broke down in a bout of pathetic tears and proceeded to explain to the audience how he wants Mikasa to love him forever and ever, even in her wet dreams, all the time. Then he unbelievably turned himself into poultry, ambiguously turned himself into a bird, and said he's finna head out. Now, if that doesn't sound like freedom to you, I don't know what. Divine comedy aside, it is a thing of good or at least understandable reason to state that the ending was pretty lackluster, considering how epic and prestigious the story was. And this introduction is dragged on for too long, so to get to the foreskin of this ordeal, I will come out of the closet and admit that I too have dreams of becoming a prestigious, successful author of my works. So I couldn't help but wonder where Isayama went wrong from an objectively critical standpoint. I have great respect for the man, and he truly did make something worthy of the sublime. Well, of course, right until the moment he fell off the lightning. But the reality of the matter is that we're human, and failure is always just around the corner. Happens to the best of us. And so I thought that if I want to also become a successful and prestigious writer when I grow up, it would do me good to not only learn from the best, but to also recognize the error of their ways, so that I may avoid their mistakes. After thinking long and hard about it, the realization of where the man came to fail hit me faster than the time it took Mr. Stark to figure out time travel in Endgame. And so while using John Truby's guidelines on story, here I am to make the argument that Attack on Titan's ending failed its story and audience for the following reasons. It failed to deliver a satisfactory conclusion to its main characters' arcs. It failed to deliver a rational and meaningful moral message. And that nothing changed. Thesis Component 1. Failure to deliver satisfactory conclusions to main character arcs and changes. The main key points of this section on character arc failure fall under the following: psychological and moral need, self-revelation / change or lack thereof, and lack of positive or negative catharsis and defeat. For a story as heavily serialized and plot-driven as Attack on Titan, what really persuaded me of its greatness was how human the characters reacted to the events throughout the story and the decisions that they made. Character development is essential and one of the most satisfying things in storytelling. And this is one of the reasons the ending failed. To start off, I will make the claim that neither Eren nor Mikasa, two of the most important characters in the show, had any legitimate character development at the conclusion of their arcs. And I don't even know what to say about the cute femboy Armin, but a bit more on that later. This is why the story felt it had no true resolution to the conflict, and why I think Isayama betrayed us on purpose. Because most of all other memorable characters had full character arcs worthy of conclusion. There is no way he did not realize this. See, in Truby's Anatomy of Story, in order to create a compelling character, they require needs that are both psychological and moral in weakness, which they must change or overcome to prevent from being destroyed at the end of their journey. Both the psychological and moral need can be defined as the things a character must fulfill within themselves in order to have a better life, otherwise are destroyed by the lack of self-revelation. It could also be that they find themselves too late, and so it would yield the same result. The psychological weakness, however, differs from the moral in that it is the flaw that is crippling the character's mindset / development, whereas the moral weakness affects the people that the hero interacts with in the story. And a key point is that the character should not be aware of either of their needs, and this is often because they have some substantial justification to maintain their weakness and perception of the world. In defense of the claim that the Grandmaster up on purpose, I'm gonna go ahead and use the main characters on the other side of the wall, where he executes these principles perfectly. Reiner is a character of obvious mental disorders. Due to the nature of the things he witnessed and acted out over the course of his mission, the troubled fellow contracted some nasty stuff like PTSD, DID, and probably AIDS as well, to say the least. Reiner's initial psychological weakness is that the man believes his own people to be a race of devils that must be wiped out for the good of the world. And later, at the start of the Marley arc, it is shown that Mr. Braun has little to no self-worth and is in fact suicidal. Reiner is responsible for the invasion and destruction of Eldia's defenses, in which tens of thousands were either crushed or consumed by hordes of extra feet-long zombies. Because of his psychological weakness, he cares little for human life and went as far as to sacrifice one of his comrades, Markle, due to his belief that he would be redeemed by Marley in his acts of genocide against his own race. Mr. Braun needs to realize that despite the atrocities committed by Eldians against Marleyans in the past, his actions only make him as bad as the people he is condemning. He also needs to overcome Marley's manipulation and to stop justifying atrocities that will betray his conscience. For f***'s sake, Mr. Braun, yes, killing is wrong. The self-revelation is the fulfillment of the character's moral and psychological needs at the climax or end of their journeys. Fortunately for Reiner, he eventually came to his senses and stopped lying to himself when Eren came around and slapped him with the "We're not so different, you and I," and then proceeded to service Marley with the Genocide No You reverse card. Reiner realized that killing all Eldians within the walls wasn't the best way to redeem himself and his family under Marley's persecution. He later tried to make amends by apologizing to Jean and trying to talk things out peacefully. Like any brainwashed honorary Marleyan, Bertolt mirrors the same weakness as Reiner, although he seems to have a better handle on the psychological trauma. The unfortunate thing about Bertolt is that he died before realizing his self-revelation. In the end, his weakness got the better of him, and he was destroyed by it. It was too late for him. This is a tragic case in character arcs, although it works well enough if done right. This works in storytelling because whether positive or negative, there is catharsis to be had in the conclusion of a character's fate, so that the audience may transition to the new equilibrium. Remembering back to the scene, yeah, it was tragic and sad when he was crying and but I remember not allowing myself to feel for the lad. When you do the crime, you do the time. Every dog has its own day. He died a villain's death. The key emphasis on this point is catharsis, no matter how bright or bleak a character's journey ends. These points serve as the basis for my criticisms to the conclusion of Eren Yeager's character arc. Let's rehash this formula. In his downgoing a legitimate turn to absolute villainy, Eren was a proud Eldian, and he held the belief that in order to truly be free from oppression of Marley and the rest of the world outside the walls, he would have to stomp all human life into the ground. Since childhood, Eren always held the mentality of us versus them, and never stopped even when things became a bit more complicated. And this segues into moral weakness, where Eren came to see that not everyone outside the walls was evil and a threat to humanity like initially believed. But this didn't stop him. The man did not give a single frick and was out there mass murdering civilians long before the rumbling. The Sigma male had already made up his mind. Need and self-revelation. So given the setup and complex weavings of his character, the payoff is where things went horribly wrong. The thing with Eren is that he was too good of a main lead for his own good. Because as it is, the thing about character development is that the hero is unaware of their own flaws. They have to truly believe that everything they are doing is for the best, and it cannot be any other way. This is what it means to be a great character. A character has reasonable explanations for their warped outlook and unjust actions in life, But this does not work if they go about achieving their goal while harboring the knowledge that they are indeed wrong in approach. To quote Truby, "Your hero should not be aware of his need at the beginning of the story. If he is already cognizant of what he needs, the story is already over. He should become aware near the end of the story, only after having gone through a great deal of pain or struggle." Apply these principles to Eren, who, despite having had the just motivation of wanting to end the war between Eldia and the outside nations, in addition to wanting an end to Historia's suffering, along with her descendants, who would have had to go through a perpetual cycle of having to devour their own family members for the Founder's power. Eren knew it to be true that stomping the rest of the world to smears upon pavement was not the best way of going about things. This is inferred by Armin, who realized that at the time Eren was in control of Ymir, he let his friends utilize the power of their titans to try and stop him. When Armin confronts him about it, Eren claims that they are free to do whatever they want, which, sure, I suppose you could say it falls in accord with his philosophy of freedom. But then again, removing their titan powers wouldn't take away their freedom, only the ability to prevent him from achieving his goal, which is freedom for himself in Paradise Island. This is elaborated further in the final chapter when he states that he knew what he had to do, but couldn't see the end of it, and that the whole time he was hoping his friends could stop him. See, this right here is the problem. If Eren really did believe that the rumbling was the best thing for world peace, he wouldn't have allowed anyone the opportunity to try and get in his way. If Thanos didn't believe that erasing half of all life in the universe was a necessary evil for his just motivations, he would have been happy if the Avengers managed to stop him. And just to be sure, the argument here isn't that Eren's acknowledgement of genocide equals wrong from the start is what ruins his character development. It is that he did not believe his immoral actions were the best way of solving his issues with the world. Eren was aware of his need. He knew he needed to be stopped. This essentially eliminates any possible change or self-revelation to occur, because there was never anything to realize. The man outright refused redemption, and if that isn't the uppermost Sigma move, then to hell with it all, man. It isn't necessarily a problem in story that a character comes to a point where they are unable to change. There are plenty of ways to gain satisfying conclusion, given appropriate course of direction. But another reason the ending felt like a betrayal to the fans is the manner in which Isayama chose to subvert expectations, or rather, the lack thereof. Normally, subversion is a handy trick, yet in this case it didn't work out as well as one would expect when you pull the friggin' rug from under their heels. In this analogy, imagine that the rug is embarrassingly torn apart, and not because one big son of a bitch was standing upon it. Alright, so perhaps I was proud of myself when I thought up that analogy, but I didn't expect it to end up confusing me. I don't know where I'm going with this, so how about we start over? So on the matter of killing off fallen protagonists and villains, there are two categories in which the archetype of Eren falls into. One is the irredeemable arc of a fallen hero, or simply an antagonist, like Lelouch from Code Geass, or Walter White from Breaking Bad. Another is the irredeemable villain, or fall arc, as it is seen in characters like Macbeth from Shakespeare, Light Yagami from Death Note, and even some real-life examples like Adolf Hitler from the Third Reich. Having these in mind, I would assert the argument that Isayama tried to subvert these categories by applying both at the same time, even if unintentional, and as a result, Eren could not fit in either one of them for a genuinely satisfying ending. The problem is that I'm gonna have to elaborate, and this is already the longest video I've ever made, so who knows, I just might turn racist. Well, how about a brief summary? Lelouch for Britannia falls under the redemption arc, because despite all the questionable things he did, like manipulating his companions as pieces of chess, mass murdering innocents by mistake and sometimes on purpose, and also shunning all the people that ever cared for him. In the end, he did it all believing he did what he had to do so that his sister may live in a happier future, free from oppression of the king and the Britannian Empire. he was extremely egotistical, and his intentions were at times questionable. But when he had the world in the palm of his hand, in the end, he never lost sight of his virtuous dream for a better future. He plotted and made himself the focus of all hate in all nations. That is why it was actually sad when his best friend and ultimate rival ran him through with a longsword, plopping his skinny ass over like mom's spaghetti. It truly was a heartbreaking scene. Maybe even cried, but nobody will know that. Walter White is another fine example. He knew his days were numbered, and so unquestionable opportunity presented itself. He fell far and deep into evil, but he never lost sight of why he did it all. I mean, sure, he watched Pinkman's girlfriend die and lied to him over and over, took advantage of him 101 times, forced him to kill Gil Whittaker, the nicest guy in the entire show, who also looked up to him, sold him to slave-trading neo-Nazis, poisoned a child, had some nice Mexican cleaning ladies deported, bombed a nursing home for the elderly. Oh my goodness, Mr. White did nothing wrong. And what did he reap from all these good deeds, you ask? In the end he was discovered, his family left him. The son who loved him most came to hate him with a burning passion, and he lost everything he fought for. Still, his death was never triumphant, because in his final moments, he did all he could to fix what he could, like politely convincing his backstabbing son of a bitch friends, the Shorts, to legally sneak in an irrevocable trust of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 M's in the bank account of Walter White Jr. upon his 18th birthday, in addition to rescuing Mr. Pinkman from slave-trading neo-Nazis. In the end, the audience was rooting for him, because he tried to make things right, as best as he could with the little time that he had left. Under the irredeemable villain, or equally alike, the protagonist's fall arc, it usually begins with them already succumbing to darkness, heavy with hubris, and unaware of their self-revelations, or at least the truth of how they should act in the world. And what causes their fall is the overwhelming advantages granted by their hubris, and as such, they are unable to attain the truth of self-revelation. Macbeth from Shakespeare is an original example, but since the story was an assignment I never finished in middle school, Light Yagami will have to do. So let's have ourselves a quick look at the god of the New World. Unlike the negative and tear-jerking death of a redeemed antagonist, the audience was rooting for Light Yagami's defeat because he could not overcome his thirst for power and absolute dominance. He believed that the world was full of evil, and with the utilization of the Death Note, would sort out the bad weeds so that the good and just remained. The problem is that he took it too far, and became the very embodiment of injustice, as he killed the innocent who were not on board with his plan of assuming godhood, and as the ultimate justice of the New World. It was all the more satisfying when the turntables and odds stacked against him, and he started to panic. All the last-minute hasty schemes and apparent humiliation. I remember pressing replay on that bitch. The stubborn lad had it coming. So, considering the aforementioned paths that produce positive or negative bittersweet catharsis and the completion of each antagonist's arc, contrast that to how Eren's ending felt. How did it make you feel when Mikasa finally got to the control center and chopped off Eren's head? Let me know in the comments. Just kidding. I already know what you're going to say, and that is nothing. And I mean literally nothing in the sense that no one will actually answer my question. I hate it when YouTubers do that. Who do you think you are telling me what to do? How dare you? Who do you think you are, you son of a bitch? But ironically, that is exactly how I felt when I saw the promiscuous lad getting his head chopped off. I felt nothing, but luckily that was redeemed by the tragic scene of sexual assault that followed shortly after. See, when I said Isama tried to have it both ways, I meant that he had Eren commit extremely irredeemable acts without turning back. When Eren knew he was in the wrong, then he tried having the audience sympathize with him through Armin and Mikasa's tolerance and understanding. I mean, look man, it is pretty evident that Eren was not written for a redemption arc. He had already done some questionable things at the beginning, but it was still arguable if he would actually go through with the rumbling. But the moment he went over that first town and crushed the little boy he'd saved in that back alley, all doubt turned to smears. Redemption was no longer an option, and it would only be fitting that he suffered the consequences of his great and unwavering hubris. But what is Eren's hubris, the viewer would ask? And in asking this question that I made up myself, allow me to illuminate you. In the components of a fall arc, as applied to the post-time-skip version of Eren. Number 1. A character believes a lie. The first regression of the fall here would be that, from the moment he saw his future before Marley's invasion, Eren came to believe that the entirety of the outside world was evil, and that it needed to be destroyed in order for the Eldians on Paradise Island to be free from oppression, and finally be at peace. He clung to this lie even after visiting a town in Marley and saw that not everyone was at war with Paradise Island, and that a lot of people were oppressed by their own government, and were simply just living their lives, indistinguishable from his own people. Number 3. Character rejects truth and 4. Believes stronger lie. It is revealed that when Eren retained the founding Titan's power, he learned he was the one who allowed Bertolt to destroy the Wall Maria and usher in hordes of Titans that killed tens of thousands, one of which ate his mother right in front of him. The truth he rejects here is that he is the cause of every great tragedy that happened to his people on Paradise Island, and that he basically set himself up. Despite this realization early on, he still went ahead and activated the rumbling. This is also after the fact that his friends told him to go about things another way, suggesting peace talks first, instead of killing everyone and everything and every living thing that walks the earth outside the island. What really ruins Eren as a sympathetic fallen hero is the fact that, while a fallen hero or antagonist's actions may not be in the right course of action, their past suffering makes it understandable for why they cannot embrace the truth. But due to the ending's revelations, the same empathy cannot be applied to Eren, as it is revealed that he was the cause of his own suffering. This is one of the ways in which the author destroys Eren's character. Eren is supposed to fit under the fall arc, because in the beginning he was ignorant to the truth of the world, which is what formed and evolved his hatred, from Titans to the real enemy being Marley, an empire that subjugated his people and weaponized them against their own. Eren wasn't always planning to wipe out the entire world, but only to kill the enemies that brought suffering to his home. Now, for a moment, let us put out of mind the fact that Eren tried to sabotage his own plan by allowing his enemies the means by which to stop him. Another main problem Isayama used to betray the arc of a fallen hero was having Eren pretty much succeed, only for his friends to come pat him on the back for the atrocities that he'd committed. The problem isn't that he basically won, or that he was unrepented thereafter. There are plenty of successful stories in which villains win. The problem is that instead of Eren losing all his ties to humanity and the people he knew to call friend, Isayama had them come and sympathize with how he did them a great favor by committing the greatest crime on earth for their sake. Eren was written down on an irredeemable path, only to be reinforced and uplifted by the very people that tried to stop him. Really, what the heck does that accomplish? Where's the rationality or coherence in that? Like, imagine if in the end, when Light Yagami is confronted in the warehouse, all surrounded, sweaty and out of trump cards, then suddenly everyone he's caused pain and suffering starts showering him in applause and congratulation for being such an egotistical, selfish, and unforgivable scum of the earth, and how they won't let this era go to waste. Imagine if Hitler, panicking and blowing his brains out upon the realization that he'd lost the war, the leaders of the Allied nations had a secret meeting with him in which they thanked him for carrying the burden of happily committing mass genocide on millions of innocents, and how they won't let this era go to waste. Then Einstein comes and puts him to rest with a sleeping needle and a sweet gentle smooch on his forehead. Am I crazy, or does that sound like this one book I read? Let me know of your thoughts in the comments. Look, the point I'm trying to make here is that it cannot be had both ways. There's this phrase about having a cake and eating it as well. I think it applies here. Where is the catharsis in all of it? Where is the negative satisfaction of seeing the villain in glorious victory, and the heroes acknowledging defeat? Or vice versa? Where's the price of victory in exchange for all the things that made them a sympathetic human being? This is how Isayama disappointed his fans. They cut off Eren's head, and the big said, "Alright, I guess I'm going to head out." Attack on Titan story is heavily plot-driven, but it is how the characters reacted to tragedies that made it so rich in humanity. But if the villain had no reaction to his own defeat, why should we care that Eren was defeated? If the hero defeats the villain, only to kiss up on their injustices. Why should we care what they did? If no one acknowledges anything in the end, why should we, as the audience, care? Funny thing that Zeke had a better ending than Eren. It was last minute, but it's ironic that the guy who was most despised and undeserving of anything good in the story, not forgetting Flock, did the right thing and realized his faults and decided to help out as much as he could. Alas, it was far too late for absolution, and he knew that too was too much to ask for. And actually, Zeke's plan was to negate the ability for Eldians to reproduce, thereby ending the cycle of discrimination. Of course, this would mean the extinction of a people, but at least it's not as irrational as senselessly killing all Marleyans, Eldians, and everyone that had nothing to do with anything. All Eren had to do was cut off the paths of the founding power, like he did in the end, before all the unnecessary carnage. That is literally all he had to do. Peace talks would even have made more sense that way. The actual solution to the whole mess was undermined by all the overboard shit Eren did. And for what? Eren never did what he did for the sake of Eldians, or the island, like Armin idiotically suggested. My nigga, what do you mean thank you for the sacrifice? The fellow was happy to do it. All the crocodile tears he shed for those boys he smeared into the ground. All sympathetic traces of guilt and remorse for what he had done up to that point. All was forgotten and passed his mind when he elevated himself into the stratosphere and screamed freedom at the top of his lungs, riding his great and unwavering hubris to glorious heavens. He did it all for a childish and selfish dream. He wanted freedom, even if it meant killing all of humanity, to achieve a fruitless and good-for-nothing dream. I also found it funny that, instead of having peace talks with Marleyans, it was meant towards the Eldians that needed to be saved in the first place. What the frick is the point of saving a people from the rest of the world, only to leave behind a faction of others that will continue the same damn conflict? In the words of a good but controversial friend of mine, fascism wins. Speaking of failed character arcs, let's talk about how the good master skillfully made Mikasa look like a complete and total nutjob of a woman, from a scale of 10 to 11. There's a noticeable trend in anime and manga where the female of the Trinity basically exists for one of the two leading males. She has no true motivations of her own, and if any, they're cast aside early on in favor of a blind and undying love for the male lead. Like, you know how Sasuke rejected Sakura several times, tried to kill their team member and his only friend for power, left his home and village and joined the enemy, was toxic to pretty much everyone and everything that's ever cared for him, and even once tried to kill Sakura herself? Like, even when they got together in the end to live happily ever after, the man knocked her up and left her to be a single mother, accusing the life of a deadbeat dad. And years later, when his daughter came looking and found him, he almost ran her through because he had no idea she even existed. Yeah, well, none of that matters anyway, because in the end Sakura will always keep running back to him, like a woman attending another round of domestic violence, because apparently she sees something in him, perhaps a second beating. Now, you're probably wondering how Sakura's blind and unwavering love for Sasuke has anything to do with Mikasa's blind and unwavering love for the good man Eren. What an unfair comparison. The difference between them is that unlike Sakura, Mikasa was actually a useful member of her team. Born of the Ackerman, she is the very definition of a strong female character, being almost as strong as Big Daddy Levi, and just as ruthless and determined. All those awesome qualities about her, but one whisper of Eren's name in her ear and she will come a little. In addition to losing all logical neurothought capacity, it is never enough to simply be physically strong, and what really matters most is the ability for a character to overcome their weaknesses in order to become better human beings, or to be destroyed by their inability to grow. And that is exactly what Isayama denied Mikasa Archaman. Character development. Although do not mistake my meaning, the reason and background of why Mikasa loved Eren so much was understood and very much coherent, up until the moment he wiped out 80% of humanity for a selfish goal and made it seem as though he had no choice. She failed to acknowledge that the Eren who saved her life back then and comforted her with a red scarf around her was far gone and had been replaced by someone who only cared for themselves. Although it could also be argued that Eren was always like that. Either way, the fact of her inability to see truth remains. Then again, I think Mikasa very well knew Eren was no longer the boy she idealized, but she never truly cared for anything else. It never mattered what horrible thing Eren did or said to her. She was always going to love him. And initially, this sounds sweet and phenomenologically amazing. But to be freaking for real with you, Chief, if a woman ever loved me to that extent, dialing 911 and locking her up in a mental institute would be the best thing for the both of us. Mikasa gracefully cutting off Eren's head, making out with it, and holding it to her bosom felt like the most lunatic 10 out of 11 shit, and severely undermined the potential of her character. Like I really thought she was being built up to finally reject Eren, and I thought this was foreshadowed within the moments Annie kept telling her they might have to kill him. She acted like everyone was telling her some unfunny joke she had never heard of before, but I thought she would be brought to her senses in the end. It reminded me of Walter White Jr., who initially refused to believe his father's extracurricular activities as an unrivaled chef and a master magician in making people disappear. The humble image of the way he saw his father was utterly betrayed, and he could no longer ignore the ugliness of how monstrous the man actually was. And he could no longer be his #1 fan. He was disgusted the last time he heard his father's voice, and in their last exchange, he wished death upon him. It really was a brutal scene. Alright, so all of that sounded hell of intense. But it was not to say that Mikasa had to utterly reject Eren with a burning passion like Walter White Jr. did with his father. All she had to do was separate her irrational attachment towards him and acknowledge that Eren was no longer the compassionate and caring boy that wrapped that scarf around her. He tainted the memory of what the scarf meant, and she simply had to come to terms with it. But
no freaking way.
Nah, Big Sauce. She chose to blindly love him all the way to his grave, without a waver of second thoughts. And with that, Isama skillfully wasted her potential, and successfully added her to the long list of incompetent female anime protagonists who are no good for nothing and truly belong in the streets. Every good, or at least half-decent story, has a moral argument it sets up and builds upon. At the end of a story, a character must choose between two moral choices, one of which determines the main theme of the story, and shows or tells the audience how the author thinks people should or should not act in the world. For example, the famous saying in Christopher Nolan's The Dark Knight, "You either die a hero, or live long enough to see yourself become the villain." And with that in mind, I have to question the moral message of Attack on Titan's ending in regards to how Eren is portrayed, considering the path he had taken. I have to wonder, did the author really want us to root for Eren and to agree with Armin and Mikasa's sentiments towards his downgoing? Did he really try to have us believe Eren sacrificed himself for the good of world peace by massacring 80% of it? If this is so, then there is no way it can rationally be taken seriously. And if not, then I wonder, are we the ones meant to criticize the characters? Because that ending seemed pretty genuine. Were we not supposed to take Mikasa seriously when she visited Eren's grave, and the man pulled up in bird form to do that scarf thing one more time? No matter how you slice it, there's a problem in execution on both ends. The part that struck me most of all was when Eren revealed to Armin he is the one that allowed the fall of Shiganshina, which caused the deaths of 10,000 people, including the devouring of his own mother right before his eyes. In the beginning, the good man Eren wanted freedom for all Eldians by crushing the Marleyan forces and the oppressors in power. Sure, there were casualties in the beginning, but it was never intentional. Rather, more of a side effect of war and mass destruction. But to be sure, the rumbling is where he contradicts himself by coming to the generalization once again that the entire world is out for Paradise Island, including the Eldians in desperate need of liberation from the Marleyan oppressors. So in the name of freedom, Eren destroyed the walls that protected his people from Marleyan oppression, killed his own mother and set himself up, unnecessarily killed other innocents outside the walls that would have followed him, created a faction of Eldians that would continue the cycle of war and oppression against the defenseless 20% of the world, including fellow Eldians in opposition of the fascist regime. And finally, after little to no satisfying consequences as a cost of his triumph. The menace transmographies into a bird and f***ed off. And all this is done in the name of freedom for Paradise Island? But where's the freedom to be had if not just for himself? Where's the unifying factor in all of this? I mean, first of all, the plan of villainizing himself to be the biggest bad was absolutely pointless. The Marleyans never once thought of him or his people any other way. And second, there is an entire military faction of Jaegerists that see him as basically Jesus. What exactly did villainizing Eren change, if not reinforce what was already true on both ends? Where's the peace, freedom, and unity in Eldia? He misled and ended up dividing his own people, for them to create civil wars amongst themselves long after he's dead? Is the message here that war and oppression is okay as long as it's coming from the fellow members of your race? And also, to the insurgents that opposed him and the Jaegerists, what the f*** is the point of struggling so hard to stop him from destroying the world, fail by the majority percentage, and then come to thank him for the errors of his ways? Couldn't you have waited until he was done and then thanked him? Now obviously these are all rhetorical questions. I'm not actually looking for answers, but feel free to leave some in the comments. So, not only is it so that ultimately there was no point or benefit to what he did and endured, if not for himself, the heroes thank him for committing global genocide and creating infighting within their own people, and accomplishing nothing inherently positive for the world but a temporary ceasefire from the enemy. I also found it funny when all the ghosts of deceased Service Corps members appeared one more time to salute the remaining soldiers. Like, wait, what are you saluting? You literally were played and actually died for nothing. The war isn't over, you fools. I suppose I can understand if the message was that war is never ending no matter what people try unless everyone dies. I mean, f*** me, it's literally spelled out in narrative form at the end. What I find most problematic is how the supposed voices of reason just came to reinforce the villain, to make him seem as though he really did something incredibly worthy of martyrdom. In the end, the author ignores a fundamental problem by giving Eren a pass through Eren and Mikasa, creating no rational moral message of the overall story, and thereby undermining a payoff 10 years in the making. It takes me back to that one incredible moment where the undercover Eldian soldier told Grisha to save Armin and Mikasa, and when he was asked who they were, he told him he didn't know, that they were not his memories. And I remember being baffled by how incredibly sublime that moment was, and surely the great master was preparing us for one hell of a conclusion. And sure enough, yes, but actually no. The strength of a heavily serialized and linear plot is that everything that happens from the beginning is going to reflect over to the end. Each ending of an arc ties directly into the next, like from the moment of one's birth to the time they're teenagers and unto their death. There's no breather or difference in between, like say Hunter x Hunter, where each arc doesn't necessarily continue from where the previous one left off. Of course the end goal is always the same as promised at the start, but each arc is different. Each arc is different enough that you can identify it with certain things, like new characters, new environments, a new villain without any ties to the one before or after, and even a change of tone. Some arcs may be darker than others. This is different from stories like Attack on Titan, where it's one continuous line, and it is a bigger deal if you were to skip or watch them out of order. Stories like this aren't as predictable as to what will happen, which makes the eventual endpoint all the more promising. It's one big tightly woven and meticulously crafted epic of a narrative, and so the problem with such heavily constructed linearity is that everything from the beginning is building up to the final moment, which must succeed. And when it disappoints, everything leading up to it collapses like a domino effect. The Grisha Jaeger plot being a good example. Instead of elevating the story to grander heights upon rewatch, it just ruins it the next time you do, because now you come to realize that everything being foreshadowed won't amount to the supposedly mind-blowing conclusion hinted at. I didn't think would happen to Attack on Titan, because the author seemed too competent to fail. But I suppose the same could have been said about the directors of Game of Thrones once upon a time. The only difference being that Game of Thrones showed signs of collapse a season or two earlier, rather than the final 3 chapters. Nevertheless, the destruction of theme and character suicide was an equal magnitude. Gabby is a direct parallel to young Eren, and I thought she would be a good topic of discussion, considering she actually got a good ending of positive character development. But here we are at the end of the video, and I'm not sure if it was the laziness to make this script any longer, or was it because I suddenly had a flashback where she shot my homie dead. Either way, to hell with her. Armin's sentiments towards Eren remind me of that one scene from WandaVision, where the thick black chick said something like, "These people have no idea how much you sacrifice for them." After the evil witch had given up on enslaving and mentally abusing an entire town of human beings, all to help her cope with the deactivation of her beloved sex doll. And to be completely honest with you, Chief, with a deal as good as she had it, I'd probably do the same. There's a very smart lad by the name of Nathorn Ballad on that Quora website, who wrote a 10-page essay about a year before the series' end, analyzing the character and motivation of Eren, and how the story would end, predicting that Eren was too far gone for redemption, but that he won't destroy the world because he will be stopped before he does so, and will suffer a devastating eternal defeat, or at least pay a heavy price. Oh, how wrong you were, Sir Nathorn Ballad. I mean, technically he wasn't wrong though. He had a really good theory. He basically predicted what logically should have happened story-wise. But the one thing he never foresaw was Isama being dead ass when he said he wanted to whip the dab and majorly hit his folks. The brilliance of this ending is that he once said he aimed to betray his audience. But the man had such a good reputation, people took it to mean something good. But thinking about it now, when is the promise of betrayal ever really something good to look forward to? Think, Mark, think! To be fair though, maybe to him this really was the best ending he could have made, and never intended to purposely have it seen as a disappointment. Disappointment is never a writer's goal, and his story was hurtful in all the right ways, for a long time. Maybe he decided for characters to stay true to their flaws, and that nothing truly ever changes regardless of what the story demands. Mikasa will always love Eren no matter what, and Armin will always back him despite the truth. And perhaps that was what the author thought would hurt his audience. The hell do I know? I can only speculate. Although the one thing I know to be true is that intention only ever turns out as good as the execution. And this is to say that it doesn't matter what you mean to carry out, but the manner in which you go about achieving it. And this wasn't it, Chief. I was disappointed by the ending as a lot of fans were. But that's alright, mate. My entire life is a disappointment anyway. Ha! Just kidding. I'm not that relatable. I suppose I liked some things about the ending. I mean, heck, you can't hate everything. Don't quote me on that. I like that Annie and Reiner changed and got to reunite with their parents, who thankfully survived the rumbling. I like how Big Daddy Levi survived, even though he's broke now, and how the insurgents is now one big happy family, when they would have violently mauled and lynched each other on the spot once upon a time. To be frank though, Attack on Titan is one of the most sublime works I've ever seen, and I say this mainly due to how incredibly well the anime managed to elevate the graphic novel, giving voice to dramatic characters, and not to mention the damn best soundtracks you'll ever hear complement a story. The soundtracks are incredible. Sawano Hiroyuki is the Hans Zimmer of anime. To be for real with you, Chief. When I think of the word sublime, only few things come to mind, and the Attack on Titan anime is one of those few things. Well, granted I maintain the cope and forget about how Isama massacred my boy. This will remain to be true. I also salute the 10+ years of hard work. The dedication and consistency. Very inspirational. I hope to see my own works come to glorious completion one day. Well anyway, this went on for far too long. I can currently confirm to have turned into a full-fledged racist. But I think I've just about said precisely what I wanted to express. And perhaps you found some meaning from it. So, if you fell in love with me, hit me up on a flip phone.